welcome to Module 3, Program and Practices. So this is when we're getting into the nitty-gritty of your project plan and how to encompass not only cultural diversity and what's feasible for your area based off of the data, but also looking at crisis and trauma. As you know, Texas has had recently the Uvalde school shooting. Before that, it was in 2018, and it was the Santa Fe school shooting. And so we have to understand and recognize that our schools are not as safe as they used to be. I don't think it's necessarily to students. I think it is more of how we're approaching safety and security within the school system. And so looking at that, we're going to look at today programs and practices to make sure that we're safe and secure. I have also provided you with several links in your module that you can go to for further information. I highly recommend it. Most of the, actually all of the information I've provided you, schools are using and utilizing on a regular basis in order to make sure that their schools stay safe and secure. So first thing is we have to understand crisis prevention. What is it? How does it look? And how can we help prevent crises from happening? So again, I'm going to go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Basic needs, physiological needs. Our students need to have access to air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, and reproduction support. If we are not meeting physiological needs, y'all, we are not going to be able to help our students whenever they're in crisis. We have to start at the basis. Okay? So a prime example of this is my father does mission work. And so part of what he does is he goes to different countries and he meets their needs. They need a water well, he builds a water well. He's in one location right now that he's working with that they needed a special needs school because the special needs students that are in that country do not get to go to school. And so there's a couple there that wanted to start a special needs school. And so he's working with them to develop a special needs school. While he's there, when asked, he can explain that he's there because God loved him enough to send Jesus to rescue him from his troubles. And so that's what he's doing. He's passing it along. Now that is a very rough version of the gospel, but in some of the countries that he goes to, that's where they start, and then they build from there. So it's physiological needs. If we're not helping our students with their physiological needs, they're not going to be successful academically. Then we have to provide safety needs. This means that if a student is being bullied or harassed, for whatever reason, again, you don't have to necessarily agree or disagree with the student's perception. Maybe they feel like they're being bullied, but really that's not bullying. But you still need to address their safety and provide a safe space for them. You know, we all have our own perceptions of things, of situations. I could be sitting or standing on the exact same corner with you guys and see the exact same wreck. And every single one of us is going to have a different perception of the wreck. Each of us are going to see things differently. It might be a different color, or it might be, well, this car was at fault because of this, whereas I may say, well, no, it's the other car at fault because of this. And yet we both may be right, which is why police officers like to get a whole lot of documentation and reports before assessing the appropriate action. But that's safety needs, because we're all going to come from different perspectives. Also, with our kids, if our students have had any trauma in their past, or maybe they come from a home where there's a lot of abuse, they're not going to be real trusting. You have to meet them at their physiological needs and safety needs in order to help build that trust. Students then need to feel loved and belonged. Again, a lot of the reason why we have suicidal ideations or attempts, a lot of the reasons why our students are self-harming, many of the reasons why there are school shootings by their school age classmate is because they don't feel loved and they don't feel like they belong, which then leads into the next level, which is esteem. Many times those people or those students are struggling with their esteem. They don't feel like they're worthy. And it's our job as a school counselor to help them feel worthy. Recognize them for their good job. Notice their strengths. Point out their strengths. Give them a foundation of support that they may not have anywhere else. And then finally, they reach self-actualization. When a student is in self-actualization, they understand themselves. They have a clear picture of who they are. They have a clear picture of where they're going. They have a clear picture of what they're doing. They are at peace with themselves. Think about yourself, for example. If you've struggled in any of these areas, how difficult was it for you to complete coursework? Or how difficult was it for you to return to the university and get this master's? You had to work through each of those features in order to get that self-actualization that I can do this. We want to help our students reach that as well. That is how they're successful. That is how we help them get to college and college readiness. Academics are great. You can have all the book knowledge in the world, but if you are not at peace with who you are, you're going to struggle. It's just being able to be at peace. Okay, so looking at crisis response teams. Just about every campus has this. So you're trying to prevent a crisis and you hear about a student who's made a threat. So what do? See something, say something. You report the activity. What you want to, or the activity is reported to you. What you want to do is you want to look at the key elements and how to prevent and at the same time prepare for any situations like this. Obviously, prevention is going to be the best, and the way that we prevent is by having good, solid counseling programs with solid preparation. There's only so much we can control in this world, and so if you have the best counseling program ever, and something still gets by you, it doesn't make you a bad counselor. It just means that, okay, this is where I need to tweak something, learn from this, process through the hurt, pain, grief, whatever the situation is, and move forward. You want to use evidence-based approaches. So an example is called Prepare. A lot of the schools are using that. And you want to understand that a tragic school event exhausts the school, the school's resources. So when we have tragedy that happens, I'm going to go back to Uvalde. You want to think about how many days those students were out of school because, quite honestly, it wasn't emotionally supportive for them to be in the campus where this atrocity happened. That means the school is not getting funding from the government. So it's affecting resources. Also think about the fact that these students are out of school, period. Which means they're not learning what they need to learn in order to be able to be better than, let's say, their parents. That's a resource. And so while we don't want to focus on the resources that are being exhausted because that loses focus to, oh my gosh, this many students lost their lives, and these many adults lost their lives in the Uvalde shooting. And you do want to process through that. But as a program planner, we also have to take time to look at, okay, where are the school resources exhausted, and how am I going to need to tweak my program so that way I'm recognizing the exhaust on the resources, but yet at the same time I'm still meeting student needs and still recognizing the reality of the circumstance. It's a very fine line, but not impossible. So we want to stop the violence. We want to look at what steps can we take to prevent traumatic incidents from happening. That could be providing counseling. That could be individual counseling, group counseling, for students that are at risk or maybe seem socially awkward. May not have very many friends, may not have very much of a support system. And so they're kind of on that bubble, if you will. You want to investigate any potential problems and mitigate those. So you hear or you see, which you're going to be most likely to hear or see this because you're the school counselor. Johnny's mad and Johnny's gonna get it, and Johnny's gonna take care of business at the school. Okay, well, maybe you've worked with Johnny. Maybe you know what taking care of business at the school looks like for Johnny. Maybe it's nothing, but then again, maybe it's something. So then that's where you pick up the phone, you notify your administrator, or I should say, you pull Johnny out of the class and say, hey, Johnny, let's talk about this. I saw or I heard that you put a post like this up. Talk to me about that. Again, non-judgmental, more gaining information, and how we approach Johnny's or Susie's that are needing intervention is going to make or break if they're going to talk to us. We're not the police. We don't need to go into it as if we're the police. We need to go into it as, hey, help me understand where you're coming from. And you're going to gain more information. And you want to try and prevent the stress reactions as they happen when violence occurs or the potential of violence happens. You want to do a needs assessment. Is this truly going to be a situation? Do we need to get the behavioral response team involved? What's the appropriate response? And then this goes back to the MTSS of providing a multi-tiered continuum of services. What am I doing at the beginning? What am I going to do at the middle? What am I going to do at the end? And as a school counselor, even in the traumatic events, you have to think through those processes. No, it is not easy. No, it is not fun, because you want to be able to process through your emotions just as much as your coworkers are or your students are. But your primary responsibility as a school counselor is to maintain the calm and to provide a calm, soothing approach. Because when you can maintain the calm, it brings everybody else down to a calm eventually. Some people will take longer than others. And then you can start processing the pain. For you yourself, you may go to your own therapist to process the pain. And I do highly recommend that should you ever find yourself in that situation. So when we're looking at the key elements of a crisis response, the severity determines the level of response. It's kind of like the suicidal ideation information. You have people who say, "Oh, I'm so mad, I just want to die." Okay, well, they may be mad and they may say they want to die, but they have no intentions. They don't have a plan, they don't have a desire, they don't have a time frame. They're just mad. And they're just saying a phrase. Not necessarily a good one, but a phrase nonetheless. But that's why we assess, you know. So we do the same thing with crisis response. What are the indicators? Does the student have indicators that say, yeah, this is a legitimate possibility? Maybe they have the means. Maybe they have the means and they've made some posts. Maybe they were busted, trying to bring a gun and or a weapon into the campus already once. Well, that puts the level a little bit higher than, I'm so mad I'm going to, go into school and blah, 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 blah. So you really want to be objective when you're looking at this and err on the side of caution for all students and staff. And based off of your level of response, is what determines the next step. If you have a high level of response, actually I would say if you have a medium to high level of response, I would immediately go and let your administrator know. If you have a low level of response, I would still let your administrator know, but it's not as urgent. Now, by as urgent, I wouldn't wait 48 hours. I would let them know as soon as you're able to that day. But it wouldn't be right at that moment. What tends to happen is we either over-respond or we under-respond. Oh, little Johnny's just talking. He's not going to do anything. And then he does. Under-responding. Or little Johnny said, oh, I'm so mad, I just want to blah, blah, blah. And you call in the whole cavalry over response. So you want to have a very good balance on how you're going to respond and what steps. And the steps are going to be based off of what your campus protocol is, primarily. We're just talking in general, kind of the overview. So in violence prevention, you need to look at threat assessment and intervention. So we're going to focus in on that for a little bit of time. Each of these points are underlined because I've provided you with a link for each of them for you to read and gain more knowledge on. These are the primary types of violence that happens in the school system. Number one is bullying and cyberbullying. This has become a very, very big deal lately. You may have grown up in a time where kids picked on other kids and it wasn't a big deal. Well, in today's world, depending on how bad it is, it could be considered bullying or cyberbullying. Fights happen. I will never forget the one student I had in my class or my office one day. And he came in, sat down, and he was sitting so tight and rigid that I knew he was not in the right space to be able to talk. So I let him sit and chill while I finished up a couple other things I needed to do. And he informed me this kid was a fighter. And he informed me that he chose to walk away from a fight. And so we got to celebrate that. So fighting can be quite problematic, especially in the junior high school level. Weapons. Yes, they still can find their way on some campuses. So you want to be aware of that. You want to be aware of the gangs that are in your area. Because gang violence does happen. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be off-site. But you want to be aware of it. Because it can filter into the school system. Sexual abuse does happen. Yes, all campuses are packed with cameras all over the place. But our students know where that one little spot is that the camera's not located. And that's where one of these 5 types are going to happen. And then I provided for you a data and school violence information, just so you can kind of get an idea of what does it look like in the school system. Not to scare you, but knowledge is power. If you don't know this information, you're not going to be able to build the most effective, comprehensive school counseling program. You're not going to be the most successful school counselor. So you have to understand this, even if you don't want to, because it's a little scary. Or maybe you have kids in school right now, and so you really don't want to know. I completely understand. But it's important for us to know, so that way we can take appropriate steps. So I highly encourage you to read your resources. Okay, so prevention, there's the Texas SRP. Again, this is a resource that I'm going to let you look at. But it goes through how Texas approaches any kind of crisis intervention that occurs. And this is going to be pretty true for every Texas school. I don't know of one right offhand that's not using this approach. So it's vital that you know this, especially if you're going to work in Texas. Two forms that you need to know for school threat assessment. The threat assessment inquiry. So it's going to be kind of your protocol. And yes, I gave you a link for that. And how to implement the behavioral threat assessment process. Now, again, this is a general how to implement it. When you get to your campus, they may have a more specific way to implement. After violence. So you have a student who, or you have a Uvalde situation. Let's start there. You had a Uvalde situation. And now you're all coming back to that campus and trying to start fresh. The link that I provided you is going to help you with that process. But more than that, we have to understand that there's a continuum of care, or again, going back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you don't meet those basic needs, you're not going to be able to get past the violence that occurred. And the violence that we're talking about here could be suicidal ideation. They attempted but were unsuccessful, or they attempted and were successful, and now you're working with the students that are left behind. It could be self-harm, which is different from suicidal ideation. It could be something sexual that occurred, and a student is trying to come back to campus, and they have to walk past that area every single day. And so helping them get through that process. So after violence doesn't necessarily mean school shooting. It means after one of those 5 things happen, bullying, fighting, weapons are drawn, gangs, or any kind of sexual violence happens, or any kind of suicidal issue occurs, there's a post. How do we help our students get past that? And then again, for yourself, because you're the one that has to lead them past it, and then you have to process on your own in your own time. And so that would be having somebody, a professional for you to talk to as well. It's a lot that we take on as school counselors, if you're not noticing that. And then finally, suicidal prevention. Your campus should have a protocol on how to handle suicidal ideation. The campus I worked at had a form that you filled out, and you rated the student at low, medium, or high based off of their answers. High was they had a means, they had a plan, and they had a timeline of when they were going to carry it out. So my very first student I ever worked with as a school counselor, she came in, She stated that she was suicidal. Her plan was to lay down in the middle of the road and get run over. So that's automatically all three. Because she didn't have a specific timeline, but that could happen at any time. There's no planning on that one. It's just, oh, I'm going to go do this. And so I did a little bit of reverse psychology with her, which I would tell you, be very cautious on this. Make sure you know your student. And then we started working on getting her some help. Now, the interesting thing was, between 7th and 8th grade, I was really kind of curious as to whether or not she was going to come back. I was actually afraid she may not make it back. Because when she left in 7th grade, she was still just struggling with the suicidal thoughts and ideations. Although she no longer wanted to get run over by a car. She had changed her plan. During the summer, though, she started going to this church that was in a local church in the area. And the interesting thing was, when she came back, she was different. There was like a glow about her. She was just genuinely happy. And I asked her, I said, okay, what's different? And she said, I met Jesus. And so, we had a lot of talks after that about her relationship with Christ and how to build that relationship. And it went from counseling to more discipleship. But one of the things that we have to recognize as school counselors, especially as Christian school counselors, meeting Jesus can turn our students' world around. And I will tell you, I spent a lot of time praying for this student. I spent time praying for a lot of my students. I could spend all day talking about some of their stuff. But did they ever know it? No. Not unless they asked me. But I saw Jesus working. And so there's a lot to be said there about, as Christians working in a non-Christian environment, we can still implicitly pray for our student. We don't have to, be beating them over the head with the Bible. We can be there, support them. And that's part of what helps a student go from in crisis to, okay, I think I can do this, and a sense of calm. So, again, today, or this week's assignments, the discussion board post, make sure you guys that you are responding to at least 2 of your classmates and have some really good conversations. If you go several more conversations, like 4 or 5 responses, that's great. Just have conversations. This is how we grow, is our networking with each other. And then continuing to work on your projects and your assignments. And as usual, if you need anything, you are always welcome to reach out. And y'all have a blessed week.